Welcome to the Explore Words, Discover Worlds podcast, presented by Bradford Literature Festival. In this episode, join us for a compelling discussion with Dr Husam Zomlot, Palestinian Ambassador to the UK, on the unfolding humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Dr Zomlot explores the challenges, opportunities for peace, and the future of Palestinian diplomacy. Recorded live at the 2024 Bradford Literature Festival, Dr Zomlot and Chair Secunda Kamani provide a nuanced perspective on the ongoing conflict and the role of diplomacy in resolving it.
Welcome to the Bradford Literature Festival. My name is Secunda Kamani. I'm a foreign affairs correspondent for Channel 4 News. I'm pleased to be joined by Husam Zomlot, the Palestinian Ambassador to the UK, who I'm sure all know and have been following closely from his speeches, his appearances in the media. I'm sure all of us here have been following closely the tragic and terrible events that are unfolding in the Middle East. Close to 40,000 people, the majority women and children, killed in Gaza, more than 1,000 people killed in Israel on October the 7th as well. We'll be discussing the ambassador's personal experiences of this conflict, as well as some of the origins of the conflict and the ways forward. I'll be taking questions from the audience towards the end of the talk, but first we'll kick off with some questions from myself. Ambassador, you were born in Gaza, I believe. Is that right? And you still have a lot of family who are there?
Yes, I was born in Gaza. I was born in Rafah. The whole world now knows Rafah. I'm a very proud Rafahian. I was born in a refugee camp in Rafah called the Shabura in the early 70s, without specifying the year. So people don't know how young I am. And I lived in Gaza all of my childhood and school time. I only left Gaza when I went to the other side of the homeland, that is Ramallah and the West Bank, to do my undergraduate at the time, Bir Zayt University. So yes, I lived in Gaza, I was born in Gaza.
Tell us a bit about the impact that this conflict has had on your family who are in Gaza, please.
Immense, and not only on my family. You know, when it's genocide, is when it affects every family, when it is cross-community. And that's what is happening in Gaza and in the West Bank, by the way. So every family in Gaza for the last 9 months have lost somebody. Every single family, and not just one or two. Every family has gone through the experience of displacement, forced displacement, not only once or twice or three times. Every family in Gaza, including mine, has gone through the imposed famine. Every family in Gaza is now going through the use of disease as a weapon of war and the lack of any sort of medical capacity. So my family is included, and it is apocalyptic. Really, that's the term.
Of course, you know that Israel disputes the allegation of genocide, but I wonder if we stay on the personal impact. Have you lost members of your family?
Oh, many, unfortunately, sadly. I've lost many members of my own family. And again, you know, it's genocide because it's across the board, not only from my father's side, but from my mother's side, not only my side, but my wife's side. Remember the heartbreaking image of a girl dangling on the wall in Rafah by the name of Sidra. And that girl was the first cousin of my wife. So everybody in Gaza has been affected. So yes, indeed. And it's not just about lives. And by the way, this is very important. It's also about livelihoods. Israel is not only targeting people, it is targeting people's lives and ability to survive and to withstand. So I'll just quickly give you some statistics. Israel has, in only less than 9 months, destroyed 70% of Gaza's housing or houses, including my own family, many. 80% of Gaza's schools, 90% of Gaza's hospitals, and 100% of Gaza's universities. Because the health sector is about life and the education is about the future. So you know that they are targeting people's livelihood in a way to turn Gaza lifeless. So everybody is affected. And not only my side here, but my colleagues, my team at the mission here, at the Palestine mission, one of them has lost his entire family, as in the father, the siblings, the nieces and nephews in one Israeli airstrike. So you have to also deal with your colleagues, and you have to deal with many threats against them here because of our work. And at the same time, of course, you have to do your job of representing your people. So, of course, it's sad to have to deal with personal loss. But in the end, you know that this is not really personal. This is collective. This is national. This is what an entire nation is going through.
When you speak to friends, family members who are still in Gaza, given the level of destruction that you described there, what's their attitude? Do most of them, if they had the opportunity, that opportunity is now no longer available as the Rafah border crossing has been closed, and even prior to that, it was very difficult with Gazans having to pay thousands of dollars to an Egyptian, quotation marks, travel company in order to get out of Gaza. But is the sense that you get from the people you speak to that people, if they had the option, would want to stay in Gaza, or would they want to leave? I mean, we've seen many journalistic colleagues feel that they sadly have to leave because they're thinking of their family's short-term futures, and they're worried for their safety. They're worried for their ability to give their children an education, somewhere safe to sleep.
Of course, like all of us, like any human being, you would want to make sure that your children are protected, that you can provide. Can you imagine a father or a mother, for that matter, and you have a sick child, and then you are unable to provide for them basic medical sort of treatment? Can you imagine that you are unable to provide for them a piece of bread? And 33 children in the last few weeks have died because of Israel's use of food as a weapon of war. They imposed famine. They imposed starvation, something we thought is something of the dark ages, will never be repeated again. So of course there is that pressure. And of course there are many people who are thinking now, how do I protect my children? How do I protect my family? Of course. But those who live in Gaza are not like immigrants. It's their country. And they live in Gaza by choice. I mean, my sister lives in Gaza and she's a lawyer. Her husband is a dentist. And they have had many opportunities over the years to actually leave Gaza and live in many places. Actually, her husband has a dual nationality, European, without going into detail, so they could live anywhere. But it was their choice to live in Gaza. So I think people, once this is over, you will see that people are coming back to Gaza rather than leaving Gaza, because that's their homeland. That's where they're born. It's their beaches, and it's their families and extended families. It's their social support system. It's their life.
As for the level of destruction, the number of deaths that you were talking about, you quite clearly hold Israel responsible for that, though Israel denies, for example, using food as a weapon of war. I wanted to ask, do you assign any responsibility to Hamas for what's happening now as well? Because we all know history did not begin on October the 7th. This is a conflict that goes back many, many decades with great numbers of grievances. But this level of violence that we're seeing now, this did begin as a response to the events of October the 7th. And killing more than 1,000 people in Israel was always going to engender some kind of military response. Of course, many people would say that that response has not been proportionate, is not justified, but there was always bound to be some kind of response. So do you hold Hamas responsible for what we're seeing unfold as well as Israel?
It is a ridiculous proposition, Sakanda, to assume that Hamas or Fatah or any of the Palestinian groups are the cause of the conflict. They are only the product of the conflict, the outcome of the conflict. And the conflict is not just about a piece of land here. The conflict that has been lasting for 107 years, is about attempt after attempt to exterminate, to erase the Palestinian people. So all these groups are the products of these attempts at extermination. The first attempt came from this very country at completely erasing us in the Balfour Declaration of 1970. And that attempt failed because the Balfour Declaration, the colonial arrogance of Great Britain at the time, and that era has turned us, the native population that have lived there for millennia, the crossroad of civilizations. the hub between East and West, the birthplace of Christianity, have turned us into, and at the time, 1917, we used to be 98% of the population owning 96% of the land, turned us into non-Jewish minorities. But that failed. And soon after, revolution of the Palestinian people and the understanding of Great Britain at the time that there were people and the people are willing to fight for the land, they had to change the Balfour Declaration to what was known later the White Paper. So the cancellation failed. Then in 1948, it was the Zionist militias, the interpretation of the Balfour Declaration, the Nakba that attempted at erasing and exterminating the Palestinian people. Okay, they managed to mass expel, ethnically cleanse 2/3 of the Palestinian people, but they failed to exterminate us. We stayed on our land, growing and resisting and resilient. And 67, and the occupation of the rest of Palestine, the remaining part of Palestine, and the colonial expansion and the squeezing of our lives and our land in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, in Gaza, and everywhere. The besiegements and the walls and the murders and the abductions of our children and our all the way to 2023. So I'm saying all that to say Palestinian groups are the symptoms, not the cause, not the root. The root is the denial of Palestinian people of their rights, and so long as that denial continues, you will have resistance. As simple as that.
There is, within the Palestinian people, a divergence of views on how and what form resistance should take. That's why Fatah, a party that you are a member of, and Hamas have clashed in the past. We saw both sides kill dozens of each other's members in Gaza in 2007. You both have different approaches, different views on how to interact with the state of Israel. And so that's why I'm asking you this question of whether you see Hamas as currently now part of the problem, if not the root cause of the problem. I mean, we've seen, for example, Israeli right-wing politicians, far-right politicians, Bezalel Smotrich, describe Hamas as an asset because, in their view, Hamas helps legitimize the narrative that Israel has often been propagating, that the Palestinian cause is inherently violent, is uncompromising, and is one that's run by, in their words, terrorists. And that's why I ask you about your
okay,
view.
Imagine a world, imagine a Palestine that Hamas doesn't exist. You think everything will be perfect? I mean, it's very clear. What is the root cause of all this? And Hamas is what, 20, 30 years old? What was happening before Hamas? What did Israel did to Fatah and to the PLO I represent? Do you remember Israel, Sharon besieging Yasser Arafat, the father of the nation, the founder of our national movement, and murdering, assassinating Yasser Arafat in real time in front of the world by poisoning him? So the Israelis always want you to believe and the rest of the world to believe that it is about this group or about that. What is it? That's number one. Number two, yes, there are differences. We commit to international law, international equality. That's why, to answer your question, what happened on the 7th of October and what has happened before the 7th of October and what has been happening since the 7th of October should be decided by the international legality, international judicial system. That's why we, the PLO, acceded to the ICC, to the international judicial system, signed, ratified the Rome Statute, and invited the ICC to investigate all war crimes committed in our occupied territory.
By both sides?
By all sides. Since 2014. Remember, Israel in 2004, as if this is the first war. That's why the Western media likes to pick the 7th of October as if history began here. In 2014, Israel killed 1,464 Palestinian civilians. Civilians, innocent people. That's double the numbers of civilians killed. So there has been atrocities committed. And therefore, it's the ICC that needs to come. It's an independent international entity that has to decide. But guess who blocks this? Who has been adamantly blocking the ICC and the international courts from investigating and from taking the mandate and responsibility to heart? It's the Israel completely blocking this, not cooperating, claiming that they are anti-Semites, using all this terminology, because Israel knows that it has something to hide, right? And second to Israel is the UK. Do you know last week the UK government sent an intervention to the ICC asking to stop immediately the issuing of arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant. So nobody should talk to a Palestinian about what happened. We want the world to come and investigate what happened. And let international law decide about the criminality of it, the legitimacy of it, because international law is very clear. It's very clear. Number one, international law does not give an occupying power the right to self-defense. It doesn't. An occupying power has no right to self-defense. An occupying power does not have rights. An occupying power has responsibilities to protect the civilians under their occupation, to provide for the civilians, including health and education. That's international law for you. And international law does give people under oppression, under military occupation, under colonization, and apartheid, the right to self-defense. That is international law. So let international law decide. Let international judges decide. And I tell you now, we will accept in its entirety the ruling of the international judicial system, the ruling of the ICC and the ICJ.
And I know from watching your previous interviews, you are not suggesting that deliberate killing of civilians is part of legitimate self-defense. You are saying that you would be happy for the ICC to investigate Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, those groups' involvement in it.
The international law, universal values, some say it's Western values. That's nonsense. It's universal values. It comes from all over the world. That's why it was South Africa that took Israel to the International Court of Justice, charging Israel with the crime of genocide. And now Israel has been put by the court, the judges of the court, officially on trial for genocide. Since that moment, there should not have been a conversation. Since that moment, every contracting country, like the UK, should have immediately stopped sending any weapons to a country that is committing genocide. And second, we Palestinians, and our history is very well known. Of course, we believe, not only as Palestinians nationally, but as Muslims and Christians, we believe that targeting civilians is not part of any strategy of ours. But whose civilians that have been targeted? My grandparents that were literally at gunpoint removed from their homes, and somebody who came from Europe took over? Whose civilians have been targeted? Before the 7th of October, it was the deadliest year in the West Bank. We're not even talking about Gaza. Israel this very morning, releases 3 prisoners that they abducted from Gaza, and they shot them in the back as they were released, executing prisoners. Whose civilians are being killed? The numbers are there. And you know what? That's the discussion that, okay, the 7th of October. Does any of this conversation justify the murder of more than 16,000 children? And therefore, this whole conversation about the symmetry between the two sides, that this does this and that does that, tit for tat, is so utterly wrong and has gone for a long time. There is no symmetry, there is no balance, there is no equity between the occupied and the occupier, the colonized and the colonizer, the besieged and the besieger.
I want to ask, you talked about the British government's position. We now have a new British government. Are you holding out much hope for a change in policy?
First of all, Palestine is not and should never be a party or a partisan issue. The Palestine issue should be a UK issue, a British issue, because of the history and because Palestine is an issue of human rights. It's an issue of international law. It's an issue of inalienable rights of people. It's not up for a conversation. So this party supports that part of the Palestinian rights, the other doesn't. Our rights are very straightforward. So I don't think we should engage in a partisan conversation, by the way. And it's right across the board. There are similarities in terms of party promises. The difference is the Labour Party has a base that is the Labour movement, that includes the trade unions and what have you, that are much more internationalist in their orientation. And this gives us an opportunity to work with the base to make sure that the new government does fulfill the expectation of the British people, the expectation of their base, and does fulfill its own commitments and promises as per the election campaign and the manifesto they have committed to. And we are talking to them. We will engage them. I have met Sir Keir Starmer several times in the last few weeks and months, and his shadow, now Foreign Secretary David Lammy, and many others. And of course, we need to engage and continue engaging. And we are hoping we are hoping that when Keir Starmer said change begins now, that includes foreign policy, ethical foreign policy. There will be a fulfillment of the labor values for internationalism and the respect for international law, and we will work with them to fulfill those. Number one, an immediate and permanent ceasefire. We need to see that. We need to see a massive, unprecedented reconstruction and rebuilding and humanitarian aid. We need to see accountability for the war criminals. They must be behind bars. Those who killed all these thousands of children must be in prison. And not only, and we are watching the new government about this particular item, international accountability, because Sir Keir Starmer is an international human rights lawyer. And they already said that they have full respect for international judicial system and the independence of the international courts. So we are watching there, and it's coming in the coming 2 weeks. There will have to be a decision by the new government about their interventions in the ICC. So we're working on for the side of accountability. And by the way, accountability is not just about the justice for the victims. Accountability is about deterrence. We shall never, ever allow for the mass murder of women and children, the mass destruction of homes. So that's a responsibility and an expectation, and we are working with them. And of course, we want to see sanctions. Sanctions, including arms embargo, including banning all illegal settlement products. That's the commitment of Labour.
And do you think any of this is going to transpire?
Well, they have promised. That's their policy. That's what their base wanted. There were many strong messages in this last election. There were many messages by the British people throughout the last 9 months. From the first week, 75% of the British public were with an immediate and permanent ceasefire. From the beginning, the vast majority of the British people were with imposing an arms embargo on Israel because it's a state that is committing genocide. From the beginning, the majority of the British people want to see an immediate recognition of the state of Palestine. So if this new government wants to represent its people, here you go. That's the way you represent your people.
Whatever position the UK government might end up taking, what could end up being even more significant is potentially a new administration in the White House in America. How do you view the prospect of a second term President Trump or possible President Trump?
You know, I was the ambassador in Washington when Trump was president first time. So I know a little bit about the man.
Actually, did you have much to do with him?
Well, he ended up kicking me out of the US. And now I go all over the UK saying I'm enjoying the UK so much, and I have one person to thank. That's Mr. Trump himself. Let's not get into the details, but he's transactional. He's a businessman. He thinks there is property and cash. So somebody takes the property and somebody takes the cash. In this situation, he thinks the Israelis take the property and we take some cash. And we told him, sorry, I mean, Palestine is not for sale. Jerusalem is not for sale. Al-Aqsa is not for sale. This is about our history, about our heritage, and it's about our future, and this is our land. Now, if he comes back and does the same, well, he will hear the same message, even if he closes our office again and again. But I'm telling you this because with regards to Palestine, the difference between Biden and Trump, unfortunately, is not huge, because the last administration has not helped. And for some, it has enabled Israel to commit all these war crimes. The difference could be on the world stage, because, you know, at least we know that Trump could have some interesting ideas that could be dangerous. However, I think the UK has to decide its national politics and its foreign policy, I mean, based on the UK, you know, requirements and commitments and values. Because that's one of the things. Will this new government coordinate everything with Washington? And will Washington come up with an ethical foreign policy that will bring back some sort of balance? We live in a very dangerous moment, Sikander. I worry. Sometimes it feels like the 30s. I really worry about our children. What kind of future are we leaving for our children? And look at how many crises we have. I mean, seriously, you slaughter 100 and maim 120,000 in real time. And there is no real international leadership to stop this silly carnage. All of this could have been avoided. Could have been avoided. And look how many issues and crises we are having. And you don't feel that we have an international system that is capable to protect all of us. And it feels like new politicians have forgotten the horrors of the Second World War and why we created an international system to protect all of us. Seems they have forgotten our mantra at the time, the never again. The never again was for everybody. So it's a very dangerous moment, and I very much hope that the UK, because the UK historically has been able to play the role of the penholder, if you may, of international politics. I'm really hoping that rather than waiting the lead from Washington, the UK would actually provide some sort of international leadership and statesmanship, because the direction of travel we are all going is very, very concerning.
There's still talk in international diplomatic circles of a two-state solution. We've seen the growth of Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank. We've seen, of course, the huge level of death and destruction in Gaza and the anger that's inevitably going to engender. Is that still even worth discussing, a two-state solution? Is that possible at all now?
The issue is not a two-state or a one-state. Or the PLO national sort of platform, political platform and program was one democratic state for all of its citizens.
Which now, whenever I go to travel to the Palestinian territories, that's what a lot of people tell me that they want to see. They want to see a one-state solution.
That was the platform until 1988. And then the PLO, under the pressure of the international community, adopted the so-called international Western consensus, which was a two-state solution, partition. And the PLO, many people think that the two-state solution is a Palestinian demand. That's a misperception. The two-state solution is a Palestinian concession. We conceded, so we ally ourselves with international legitimacy, with international resolutions, because there were several UN Security Council resolutions towards the two-state solution. But in any solution, it doesn't matter. What matters is rights. In any solution, these are the three non-negotiable rights for the Palestinian people that should materialize in any form of solution. Number one, the right to self-determination. We have the right to determine our own fate in our own state, independent, sovereign, not a Mickey Mouse state, full sovereignty. And Jerusalem is our capital. That's the first one. Number two, the right of return. That's non-negotiable. There is the collective side of the right of return, and there is the private side of the right of return. I mean, it's my father's property, and it's a property right.
That would entail huge demographic change to the land that's now Israel. Is it realistic, do you think?
It doesn't matter. Fulfillment of rights should not be subjected to realism or not realism. It is realistic. Most of the villages Israel destroyed and the homes they destroyed are empty. Most 520 villages and towns. So yes, it is practical, but it's about rights. So what we are going to design a peace process according to what Israel wants, not according to our rights, that's not going to happen. And that's why all previous peace processes failed because of that. And number three is equality. We should be treated equally wherever they are, wherever we are, be it a citizen of Israel, a citizen of anywhere, equal. So yes, a two-state solution is possible, a one-state solution is possible, and would guarantee the rights of everyone, all sides. The problem is Israel is not interested in any solution. They don't want a one or a two or anything. They want to finish off what they started in 1948. They want the whole land without its people. But, they've gotten with the wrong people, really. We ain't going anywhere.
What are the routes that you see as being possible to reaching a resolution to this then? Do you think issuing an arrest warrant for Netanyahu, who of course denies wrongdoing, but would that make a material difference to the conflict? Would that help reach a solution? Is it about Netanyahu?
It doesn't only help our situation, and of course it does, but it helps making sure that our international system is legitimate, because I tell you, everybody is watching. Did you hear the prosecutor of the ICC when he said he was called by a leader of the West telling him the ICC was established for Africa and Russia? It doesn't apply on like-minded Western countries, including Israel, because Israel is considered to be a Western. That brings the end of our internationalism. And everything is at stake. The stakes could not be higher. So this isn't about Netanyahu only. This is about all of us. Do we mean that law is applied equally? Because if law is not applied equally, it's not law anymore. But there is a vision for the future. And the vision is clear. We have got to enforce the vision that we have all agreed about more than 35 years ago. Number one, we need to end Israel's occupation. This two-state solution thing does not really apply to reality, because as if there are no two states and we're going to create a two-state. There is a state that is Israel, that is occupying the other state. So what we need is Israel out of Palestine, out of Palestine.
And to clarify there, are you talking about 1967 borders? What do you consider to be the occupation? Because there's differing notions within the Palestinian movement about that, aren't there?
I mean the international resolutions, which is the occupation that began in 1967, and I told you that includes the right of return to the 48 areas, to our homes that we were forcibly evicted from, removed from. Yes, so Israel has got to leave, and our new discourse has got to be get out, as opposed to negotiations. Negotiate what? Negotiate what? Just get the hell out of our lives. That does not come through just another round of talks. With who? With genocidal Bibi Netanyahu? With genocidal Israel? You know, Israel has started with ethnic cleansing, has gone through apartheid and oppression, and ended up genocidal. So you think Israel is going to give in on its own? It doesn't work this way. What works is an international decision at the Security Council. Here it is, and a recognition of the state of Palestine as a full member of the U.S. That's why Israel is blocking this. I'm sorry, a full member of the UN. Did I say the U.S.? No. We are not interested in becoming the 51st. Actually, it's not a bad idea. It's not a bad. I meant the UN. The United Nations, a full member. And you see that the U.S., they have used the veto power so many times against us. So we do not become a full member, because the essence of it is that Palestine as a state, as an entity in the international system, should not exist. We have to make it exist. And that's why recognition is very important. That's why we are asking of the new prime minister and the new government, number one priority, recognize the state of Palestine. You know why? What is our issue with recognition? I mean, who cares? I said in the Unison Congress a couple of weeks ago, I said whether the UK recognizes the state of Palestine or not, Palestine will be free. So we are not waiting. But hey, this is about the United Kingdom. This is about the correction of a historic injustice that happened to us by Great Britain. They cancelled us, and recognition would mean one thing. It's a recognition by the UK that the cancellation attempt has failed. They have failed to cancel us. So they have got to recognize the state of Palestine. That's number one. Number two, it's the best formula for peace, because you level the field. You no longer talk about Israel and the Palestinians. You know, every single statement from the Foreign Office or 10 Downing Street or the White House, Israel and the Palestinians. You know what that meant for the last 30 odd years? That Israel thought that everything is for grab, because there is Israel and there are the Palestinians who are individuals. We need to change this dynamic from Israel and the Palestinians to Israel and Palestine. And number three, recognition of a people's natural right is not a gift. It's not a favor. It's our right that is long overdue. The UK is at least 107 years late for recognizing the people of Palestine and the rights of the Palestinian people. So there is a vision. Come with us to this vision. And this vision is peaceful. This vision is legal. We use the Security Council to prevent the wars and the conflicts, to ensure that the international consensus is enshrined in resolutions. Then we use the international system to enforce accountability, and we use the international system and international momentum to sanction illegality, so we get to where we want to go. Otherwise, wasting our time, weasel words, oh, we will recognize the state of Palestine when it is right, as part of a peace process. What peace process? When is time right? So this is a moment when I think we are expecting clarity by the international community, starting by the new Prime Minister of the UK.
Final question for me before I open it up to the audience. Do you think that you have the leadership within the Palestinian movement to press for those rights as you articulate them? Because whenever I travel around the occupied West Bank, prior to October the 7th as well, anger and disillusionment with President Abbas was very, very high. It seems to be growing, if anything. Do you have the leadership who can press for this?
Let me explain this. The anger, which I understand, by the way, you cannot blame the Palestinian people. The anger is against the failed peace process, because the PLO has championed the peace process 30 years ago. It was Yasser Arafat who decided, okay, let's go for a historic compromise. Let's ally with international law. Let's ally with international resolutions. And he declared the state of Palestine in 1988 on the 1967 borders. So the very unpopular thing is the failed peace process, and as PLO and national institutions, are championing of a peace process that we thought would deliver statehood and would deliver rights. Number one. Number two, of course, like all other people and like all other countries, Palestine is always in need of reform, of democratic renewal, of course, and it's up to the Palestinian people through elections to decide on their leaders. But there is this Israeli and Israeli friends logic that has been lasting for decades. Oh, the problem is Palestinian leaders. Yasser Arafat was the problem. Mahmoud Abbas is the problem. Hamas is the problem. This is the problem. That is the problem. And then they tell you the problem is technical. Technical. We have to do some reforms and we have to bring somebody who's expert, because if we fix the Palestinian technical side, everything will be nice. And then you hear all these programs from the World Bank and the IMF about reform. The Palestinian problem is not technical, and it is not leadership. Leave the leadership issue to us. We will decide on our leaders. We will elect our leaders. The issue is political. It is political. We need to get rid of this occupation, this oppression, liberate our country, build our country, be sovereign, so we are able to convene democratic process without the intervention of an occupier.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm sure there's many questions in the audience. If we could start off with the gentleman in the white T-shirt in the second row here, and then we'll make our way further back.
Just a brief reflection about the fact that Israel is a terrorist and genocidal regime, and we need to start conversations by addressing the core issue that this isn't complicated, this is a genocide, and we all are complicit in standing up against it. So I think that's how we need to start these conversations. I just want to ask Husam, how do Palestinians and how does the world continue to support this resistance? How do we support that? How can we be the best allies?
I'll tell you what, we'll take a couple of questions and then if the Ambassador can combine the answers. This lady here in the front row, please.
Thank you for that, Ambassador. I'm a psychologist, so my interest is very much in mental health. And there's a lot of conversations happening around the legal aspects of it and the reconstructions in terms of the physical aspect of Gaza and Palestine. I'm just wondering, are there any initiatives around working towards a psychological trauma? And there's intergenerational trauma here as well. So I'm just interested to hear about what's happening around psychology.
Thank you. One question here from the gentleman in the black T-shirt.
I was going to ask if any genocide has been stopped without violent resistance.
I think the question was if any genocide has been stopped without acts of violent resistance. Do you want to take these three questions? That was one on how to support the Palestinian cause, one on efforts to deal with the psychological trauma suffered by people in Gaza, and third, a historical comparison, perhaps.
About how to support the Palestinian cause, just continue doing what you've been doing and don't stop, because they're counting on you to become numb. They're counting on you to normalize the scenes of murder and the scenes of destruction. They count on you to become fatigued. It's as simple as that. Tired. So keep the course. What happened recently, and by the way, started many years ago, but it's accumulating. What happened recently is historic in every sense. Yesterday, I did speak at another big national demo for Palestine, and people are still coming out in hundreds of thousands all over the UK, not just in London, by the way. I was in the beautiful coastal city of Bournemouth only recently, and it's so the biggest demo for Palestine in that beautiful city, only to call for a ceasefire. So cities, towns, small villages all over the UK. Activism is important, and some people say, oh, what did that do? A lot. First, it sends a message to your government here. Second, it sends a message to our people in Gaza and all over Palestine that they're not alone. So it's important. And all the sort of activism, I mean, the student encampments is historic. Historic. It only happens once every few generations. Yes, give a hand to the students. So there has to be two hands, my friend, of what needs to be done. One hand that really help us build. This connects with the question about trauma, because there is collective trauma. There is collective trauma. And I'm really, really worried about our children particularly, very much so. And whenever I have the chance to be on the phone with some of them, and when I hear some of the words and the thoughts of children, I get traumatized myself. Because the biggest challenge we have is to make sure that our children do not grow hate in their hearts. We are a nation that built ourselves and our resilience on one word: love. We love each other, we love our country, we love our homeland. And no matter what Israel did to our children, we need to make sure that they grow up to love their country more than they hate the others. And there is such a huge task for all of us to make sure that the way we were treated. Sakandar asked me where I was born. I was born in heaven, the best place on earth, a refugee camp, because you have the society to take care of you. You have, as if one mother is not enough, I had 20 mothers all around me. And that love that were given to us, they shielded us completely from what happened to them few years earlier, the Nakba. They completely shielded us. They invested in our education. They invested in who we are. So there is a hand to build, because Israel knows that, it uses maybe a small fraction of its war is militarily. It's a military war, weapons and bullets and rockets that end up in the bare bodies of our children and innocent people. But a big chunk of their war is livelihoods, is financial, is economics. They want to deprive you of the ability to live. So there has to be a hand to help us face up that effort, and there has to be a hand helping us to rebuild. But the second hand is the activism similar to that of the anti-apartheid movement of South Africa. We need to suck oxygen out of Israel's occupation, suck it out of the occupation. We have got to isolate every institution implicated in the occupation, in the colonization, in the oppression. They have got to be isolated in sports, in culture, in business, everywhere, until they come to their senses. You think apartheid South Africa would have come to its senses alone? No, it was your parents and grandparents. It was the anti-apartheid movement. It was that global movement that has forced the apartheid regime to crumble, to collapse. And I believe that the moment for Palestine, like South Africa, has arrived. The people of the world, including in the UK, are going in that direction.
Take some questions from the top of the balcony. There's a lady at the center.
Hi, Husam. So lovely to meet you. And I think I speak for all of us when I say thank you. The eloquence with which you have represented Palestine has been absolutely exemplary. You have spoken with so much class and integrity in the face of so much evil and gaslighting by Israel and its allies, namely in the West. And secondly, we know that 2/3 of the Labour government has been, and in fact over half of the new cabinet have been paid by Israeli lobby. I call that bribery. I'd call that bribery, but by the Israeli lobby. We also know that Starmer has gone on LBC, I think, and said, as a human rights activist, as a human rights lawyer, that Israel is right to cut aid and electricity and all of that. And I'm pretty sure he's also been involved with Labour Friends of Israel. I think they forget that the internet exists. So you said that you're trying to engage the Labour government, and so far all I've seen is a lot of the right kind of talk to engage people to vote for them. So how are you going to engage them in a way that they are actually taking action rather than just a lot of gobshite, that they're saying? Thank you.
One more question from the top. There's a lady here at the front, and then I think we'll probably have to leave it after that, I'm afraid.
Ahlan Husam, Ani Maha. I'll ask you my question though. I'll ask you my question in English. I'm very concerned about the thousands of hostages, the Palestinian hostages that are still being taken by the Israelis. What is being done to try and secure their release?
So that was one question about engaging with Labour in light of comments from Keir Starmer back in October, I believe. And another question about if we could broaden it out to an update on the ceasefire negotiations that seem to be resuming now. First of all, difficulties of engaging with the new Labour government here. It's something you've touched upon now, but do you think that you'll be able to have much success in changing their opinions from what we've seen articulated previously?
Let me just answer the question about Palestinian hostages, because it's the right question. Thank you for asking it. Because everywhere I went since the beginning of the atrocious attacks, I'm always asked about Israeli hostages, and I always answer We have thousands. Since the 7th of October, Israel took 4,000 from the West Bank. And in addition to the thousands they took from Gaza. And the UN reports, international reports that comes out of Israeli prisons is not only heartbreaking, it's beyond our comprehension as humans. The torture, the deprivation, the starvation in the prisons. How many they have killed, executed in prisons. Doctors. One of them, I went to his place of graduation here in London very recently, couple of months ago, because he died under Israeli torture. So, and all those people are rounded, abducted, they're captives without trial and without charge. And guess what? Not just since the 7th of October. This has been happening for 76 years. Children without trial, without charge, without giving them the right to a lawyer or visitation by their families. So this is the time to focus on Palestinian hostages, because they are hostages, and not to use the term prisoners, because prisoners assume that there is a court and legitimate court and those people have done something criminal. None of them have done anything criminal.
So we've seen, Ambassador, a resumption of ceasefire negotiations,
Yes.
the indirect ones, taking place in Cairo. Does it seem like there may be some progress now or not?
There was a Security Council resolution for a ceasefire with the 3 phases that ends with a permanent ceasefire, starts with an immediate and ends with permanent, and then the hostage release of both sides. But then Israel obstructed it. And you've seen the Netanyahu statement, the Israeli Prime Minister statement. And it's so mind-boggling that Biden comes out, the American president, and says it's Hamas. That's the word, Hamas. It's very clear Israel was not interested. But a Security Council resolution, according to my understanding of the international system, is binding. And for the how many weeks it's been since last month the resolution passed, and nobody is really enforcing. Now there are renewed efforts to enforce a Security Council resolution. But the Security Council resolution is a good step in the right direction. It did provide a sort of a plan for how do you reach an immediate and permanent ceasefire. But Israel wants the cake and eat it too. They just want everything. They want to get back their hostages, not release our hostages. They want to continue their devastation and killing of the people in Gaza and in the West Bank. They want to continue stealing our land everywhere and resources. It's not going to work this way. So there has to be commitment that once a ceasefire has reached, their genocide ends, their aggression on our people ends. Now about labor, this is where I end. This is the last question.
Indeed.
I'm a diplomat. I'm not an activist, and I don't vote here. This is not my business. My business is, my job is, my mission is to deal with any politician. Guess what? I was meeting all of your previous government officials, from Liz Truss to Boris Johnson to everybody. My job is to make sure that I represent my people with any government. And my job is to make sure that, part of the work is to make sure that the government is closest possible to our position. So will I deal with the Labour government? Hell yes, I will deal with the Labour government. And I will be meeting Keir Starmer whenever an opportunity will avail itself, or any of his shadow cabinet. However, I will also be working with the base of Labour to make sure that your politicians are on check, if that is a word I could use, that you really make them answerable to you. And by the way, the last 9 months have sent clear messages from day one about the British people and the British public opinion. And I have to admit to you that historically, Labour is at least seen to be internationalist, has the values of fairness, political and social, believe in universal values, believe in solidarity. So let's work with them to make sure that these values are implemented. And when they don't, we call them out. But we don't switch off, we engage. And by the way, one last thing. There is the Labour Party, which we are engaging and we should engage, and all of you should, and keep the pressure. But there is the Labour movement. The Labour movement. I am in love with the Labour movement, I have to tell you that. The Labour movement is really made of wide range of institutions and unions, and not only trade unions, students and what have you. The Labour movement is there, and I believe it's our best part to make sure that the party listens to its base. So let's work to make sure that this government will do what is right, that this government will make history, that this government will end 107 years of a British contribution to a Palestinian agony, that this government will end up recognizing the state of Palestine, that this government will end up imposing an arms embargo, that this government will end up helping in the international accountability and not obstructing the course of justice at the ICC and the ICJ, and that this government will actually help us getting Israel out of Palestine.
Ambassador Zomlot, thank you so much for your time. Thank you. And thank you all for attending.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Explore Words, Discover Worlds podcast, presented by Bradford Literature Festival. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe, share this episode with others and leave a rating. Mark your calendars for the return of Bradford Literature Festival on Friday the 27th of June to Sunday the 6th of July 2025.